Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of major wars, whether it be world war or a major regional war, and to consider at the time or before the war breaks out, how many people, commentators, private citizens, politicians, whatever, how many people see it coming. Do they say, well, hey, next week on Friday next week, there's going to be a world war or stuff? Do they even see it coming in general terms? Do they perceive that it's going to be a wider conflict? Do they think it's really going to be just a lot of bluff and hysteria, but it's all going to be sorted out at the negotiating table? And when the actual shooting begins, and particularly when the conflict widens to take in other countries and regions or other continents and parts of the world, people seem genuinely bewildered by it all. And at the time, now historians look back and say, well, it was obvious. It was obvious what was going to happen. Everybody should have known. But I don't think it is that obvious when you're in the middle of it and looking forward. Now, looking ahead in time. So being an armchair expert years after the event, that's the easy part. So having a look at the things at the moment where the Middle Eastern, Israel and Iran and the Gaza Strip, Palestine, all this sort of stuff that seems to be escalating there. And then having a look at the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, that the globalists are desperately trying to gin up into something bigger, and there are threats now of nuclear exchanges and all sorts of things. Now, there are some hotheads around that are screaming World War III is going to start in the next 5 minutes, and there are others who think that no, this is all a non-event. It's all just posturing and saber rattling and people acting tough and that sort of thing. But nothing's really going to happen. Now, I don't know, but looking back through history, it's clear that for the most part, people don't see it coming, or they think it's going to be a quick affair, it's going to be over quickly, or that sure, there may be some boisterous opening moves, but eventually people will sit down and talk about it and there'll be no warfare. So let's have a look at some of the major conflicts. Now, being a history buff, these sort of things intrigue me a bit because, again, historians will tell you it was obvious there was going to be some sort of major conflict, but why the people at the time didn't see it. But I don't think it's quite that easy when you're in the middle of it and you think, well, we'll just invite those guys to negotiation and we'll sort it out tomorrow. And so there are various things that are playing out in real time that don't percolate to the surface as major issues by historians looking back. And I think we need to maybe consider some of those. Now, before the Japanese invaded Singapore, and they're approaching Singapore pretty quickly down the Malayan Peninsula there, and they're routing easily, effortlessly, not even breaking a sweat. They're effortlessly routing the British forces in and making them look like absolute amateurs, by the way, routing the British forces in the Malaysian Peninsula, and they're moving towards Singapore at high speed. But you'd think from the behaviour of the British people and citizens and the folks in Singapore and the local administration, even the military, it seems like they just are unaware of it. It's in another universe. They're living in this delusional thing where that those invaders, it's just not happening. And so they're going out and they're having nights out and they're having dancing in the local cricket club, and they're doing this and doing that, and it seems like the war or the possibility of invasion or occupation is light years away. It's galaxies away. It's not even something worth considering. And even while Japanese bombers and planes are flying around overhead, all the lights are on, and in Singapore it's just a normal day and everyone's having a good time and they're going out and again they're drinking and they're eating and they're dancing and they're having a wonderful time. And while the Japanese are 50 miles away and closing fast, it's hard to believe, but such as it was. Now, one of the local administration officials, quite a senior one, said, well, we didn't want to shut the city down, or we didn't want turn the lights out, or we didn't want to stop the socializing because it may lower the morale of the population. What? So those are some of the thoughts and sentiments that were going on at the time. Now, and days later, the Japanese the British had surrendered, absolutely rolled over in total humiliation, and the Japanese were in charge, and the letters that people were writing before the Japanese arrived, just days before, the letters the citizens were writing were oh yeah, there's a few problems a mile away, but it's not a big deal. I mean, hey, not a problem, and someone will fix it, and we don't need to worry about that. And it's hard to believe. You're reading these letters, looking, what? Now there was some censorship of the media, and there was the worst of the British defeats up further up north up the Malayan Peninsula were being censored from the media. So there were those things going on as well. But even the senior officials that did know what was going on still seemed to think that there was no issue. One of the senior generals that had been sent to review what was going on in the military campaigns, like the Japanese advancing on Singapore, reported back to none other than Winston Churchill at the time, and said that the British forces were getting routed and kicked around and beaten up, and that they will be defeated in detail, which is military speak for absolutely crushed. And yet still there was this sort of, I don't know, maybe it won't happen. If we pretend it's not happening, then maybe it won't. And so an incredible attitude that didn't seem to come to grips with reality, which is really, I suppose, part of what is a war going to get worse or better, or now in some cases, say after Germany had invaded Poland in 1939 over disputes over that Polish corridor that had been granted to Poland, where East and West Germany had been separated by this Polish corridor. When the British and French declared war, and then they mobilized their armies, and they stayed on the French border. They didn't attack Germany, or they made a little half-assed attempt, but they didn't attack Germany when they could have. Now, they were caught a little bit off guard. They thought that the war against Poland would take 6 months or so and consume quite a lot of resources. They were shocked when it was over in a matter of a few weeks, and with very, very little expenditure of resources from the Germans. It was a very, very low cost, quickly won military campaign, much to the shock of the British and the French. So they mobilized their armies, and so they mobilized the armies fairly quickly during September, October, November. But they didn't attack. So the army sort of stood there or sat there or just hung out, not really doing anything. And this was referred to as the phony war, PHONEY. So this is the phony war. And because the armies are standing there, but there's no actual sort of shooting going on. Now, in May 1940, so 8-9 months after the invasion of Poland, the German blitzkrieg war machine went into action, and again in 6 weeks it defeated the French and British in what is, I think, even throughout history, is one of the most spectacular victories of roughly equally matched armies. By the way, in numerical terms, they had, give or take, a roughly equal number of tanks and aircraft and soldiers and so on, but still the Germans won a swift and crushing victory, which is a masterpiece of organization, tactics, and application of power, and so on. Now, that phony war period, that 9 months where the armies were mobilized and facing each other across the border, but where there's no actual shooting, that time If you look at the, again, the private correspondence, private citizens, many politicians and others, everyone expected, or many people expected, that that there would be no shooting, that there'd be some sort of negotiation, and that maybe the Germans would give a little bit, and the other side would go, and then in the end it'd be sorted out without the need for war. Now that was a real possibility. Hitler was more than prepared to have like a rump state, like the Grand Duchy of Warsaw that Napoleon Bonaparte had. So Hitler was more than prepared to discuss that possibility, and as long as the two Germanys were reunited, then that was considered a sort of was really their objective in going to war with Poland. So there didn't need to be a wider war, and the German attempts at negotiation were rebuffed by the British and the French, which struck me as a bit odd. Why were they so determined to fight it out? Did they think they could win? They'd seen what the Germans could do with the Blitzkrieg in Poland. But they, instead of dealing with that, they wrote the Polish army off as being useless and hopeless and not worth, a pinch of shit and so on, which wasn't really true. Was it up to the standard of the German war machine? Well, no, but that doesn't mean it was a complete waste of space or something. It wasn't. It just meant that the Germans had the most formidable military machine in the world by far. That's what it meant. So why would you want to take on something like that? Why would you? There'd been British observers in the independent military observers watching the war, and they'd made detailed reports. The British knew and the French knew what happened there and how slick the German war machine was, and yet they were determined to fight it out. That was odd, I thought. But again, most people were thinking, well, look, there hasn't been any shooting yet, so clearly they're going to sit down and talk about it, and there'll be no war. So actually not many people thought there would be a shooting war. And it was expected that if there was, it would be a defensive war in the manner of the First World War, where people would try and charge down machine gun nests at great cost, and then each side would sort of neutralize the other, and then there would be peace negotiations and so on. So again, no one saw the big war and the wider war coming. No one saw this idea that America would be involved in the war, and Russia would be directly involved in the war, and all these other peripheral places that would be involved, like Yugoslavia and Greece and so on. This wasn't perceived at the time. So really people just, again, didn't see it coming, and suddenly there it is. Then it's this world war and millions of people are dying and all sorts of things. But that wasn't foreseen. People didn't see it in that broader sense at all. And they were caught by surprise and off guard, typically, by each new development as it occurred. The British, for example, were shocked that they were defeated by the Japanese so comprehensively. They just, wow, I mean, we didn't see that coming. And the Blitzkrieg in France, they didn't see that coming. Again, once the British had been soundly and completely defeated in France in 1940, again, the Germans offered terms or offered to discuss. And the terms under the circumstance, the terms that were mooted at least were quite generous. But again, the British rebuffed that. And I think with hindsight, they should have taken that deal. If the British had taken the deal, which was leave us free to do the continent as we see fit, you can have your empire and your Commonwealth. We don't want to bother with that. It's fine. Do your own thing there. Then Hitler would have been free to invade the communist Bolshevik Soviet Union and would have easily defeated them, and so communism would be eradicated from the face, and all the Cold War and all the infiltration of the activists throughout the West that occurred, and all the communist literature and all the debasement of Western society, that would have stopped or not have occurred. So it could have been a very different world. But anyway, moving on again, even in World War I, where there was in various interlocking alliances and commitments. Germany was making a commitment to defend Austria from Russian attack. Britain was making a commitment to defend or not allow any hostile activity in the Channel and in the Atlantic, and also Britain was declaring that they would protect the neutrality of Belgium, and Austria-Hungary was going to defend the German minorities in the Balkans, and Russia was going to defend the Slavs in the Balkans, and so on. On it went. So there's all these interlocking and silly in some ways, but there were all these interlocking alliances which were meant to be warnings to someone. You do this, we'll do that, and they were meant to stop hostile activity. And this is something they believed would work, and most people did believe it would work. These alliances weren't for war; they were in attempts, as clumsy as we may see they were today, they were attempts to prevent war from breaking out. Now, once, if you look at those that said, well, war is going to happen, then it was seen by pretty much everybody that the war would last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks at the outside. There were some even saying that when the war even looked like it, was breaking out in real time, there were people that were saying, look, this is worst case, this is going to last for 12 weeks. And nobody foresaw that the war would engulf gazillions of soldiers and vast resources in material. No one foresaw that. And at every stage of the warfare, there were those that thought, well, there's any minute now there's going to be a negotiation. People, a lot of these crowned heads of Europe were all related through blood, for goodness sake. We'll all sit around the table and we'll sort something out, and there'll be no, the war will end. So there was an unrealistic, almost delusional view of what might happen. But we see again that the theme continuously, the theme throughout history is people don't see it coming. And when it does occur, they seem quite shocked. And not only that there was a war, but the extent of it and how far-reaching and all-engulfing that it becomes. So I would sort of argue that given how things are going, does it appear there's going to be a wider war? Well, I don't think so. The Russians are warned, if you do this, we'll up the ante. If you try and put Ukraine in NATO, we won't accept it. So a lot of the Western behaviour, led by the globalist cabal, has been to try and provoke the Russians and to try and widen the war. To what end or what purpose is quite beyond me. But nonetheless, those things are going. But how will that pan? Does anybody really want war? Well, no. But then no one ever really wants it. There are certain national pride issues, perhaps, or respect issues, things like that. For example, the Chinese are quite militant and belligerent, but because they want respect. We want respect, and other countries have fallen into the France of Louis XIV. They wanted respect, and so this can play into things. But even in the wars, with Louis XIV, Britain and France at war in Louis XIV, the idea there that again people didn't perceive that the war would widen in the way that it did. And again, even with the Napoleonic Wars or the post-Napoleonic period in Europe, post-1815, the idea was very much to avert war by keeping some sort of balance of power, so that no one country was powerful enough to subjugate all the others, and so wars, the idea that there's a war would be coming was seen through a light of, well, no, that's not likely, and if it is, it'll be over quickly. For example, in the lead up to World War I, there was a view that France and Britain would be more than a match for Germany. Then when you throw Russia in on top of that, the Germans won't last 5 minutes. And there were a vast number of misconceptions made that how advanced Germany had become in industrial capacity, the quality of their engineered goods, the durability of them, the quality of training for their military. all these sorts of things, their network of their transport infrastructure, how they were putting train stations in that had train platforms that were over 1,000 meters long, in some cases nearly 2,000 meters long. So ideal for unloading and decanting vast numbers of troops and moving them around quickly, which the Germans are very good at, by the way. So these sorts of things, again, all combining. Very few people see the war coming, and they see it as being much further away, and that the likelihood of it is remote, or that if it does start, it won't affect them, it'll affect someone else. And these misconceptions, you could call them delusions, are widespread before war. And when war does break out, particularly if it's a major war and an all-engulfing war, then most of the people concerned are caught by surprise. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.